My husband called me 11 months after he left me for a 26-year-old yoga instructor, and the first words out of his mouth were, "Diane, I need your help." I almost laughed. I almost hung up. Instead, I sat down at my kitchen table, the same table where he used to eat breakfast, before driving to work in the BMW he financed against our joint credit, and I said, "Help with what, Mark?" "Everything," he said. His voice cracked in a way I hadn't heard since his father's funeral. "I lost everything." I want you to understand something before I go any further. I am not a cruel woman. I am 41 years old. I run the accounting department at a mid-sized manufacturing company in Ohio. I pay my bills on time. I return shopping carts to the corral even in the rain. I am, by every measure that matters, a decent person. But decent people remember. And I remembered everything. 18 months earlier, Mark and I had been married for 16 years. We built a life together, a modest brick house in a quiet subdivision. 2 kids now in college, a joint savings account we'd been feeding since our 20s. I thought we were solid. I thought we were the couple other couples envied. Then I found a receipt. It was for a hotel room in Columbus, 90 minutes from our house, dated a Tuesday when Mark had told me he was at a conference in Cleveland. I almost didn't think anything of it. Almost, but something about the timestamp bothered me. 2:47 in the afternoon, checked in for one night, one guest listed as Mark Whitfield plus guest. I didn't confront him right away. I'm an accountant. I don't act on incomplete data, so I watched. I checked his phone bill for numbers I didn't recognize. I found one that appeared 43 times in a single month. I called it once, from a blocked number, just to hear who answered. A young woman's voice said, "Hey, baby, are you almost done with work?" I hung up without saying a word. That night, I sat across from Mark at dinner and asked him directly, "Who is Ashley?" His face went white, then red. Then he did something I'll never forget. He didn't deny it. He just exhaled, like a man setting down a heavy box he'd been carrying too long, and said, "I was going to tell you eventually." Eventually. As if infidelity was a tax form he simply hadn't gotten around to filing. Ashley was 26. She taught a 6 a.m. hot yoga class at the studio where Mark had started going for his back. He told me, with a straight face, that what they had was real, in a way our marriage hadn't been for years. He said I had stopped trying. He said I had let myself go, which was an interesting thing to say to a woman who had carried, birthed, and raised his 2 children while working full-time. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. I said, "Get out of my house." He blinked, confused, as if he'd expected tears or begging, or a scene he could later describe to Ashley as, "She completely fell apart." Instead, I stood up, walked to the hallway closet, pulled out a suitcase, and started packing his clothes myself while he sat frozen at the table. "You're really doing this," he said. "You already did it," I said. "I'm just finishing the paperwork." He moved in with Ashley within the month. He filed for divorce 3 weeks after that. And I remember reading the papers at my kitchen table, hands steady, because by then I had already stopped feeling the shock. What I felt instead was something colder and far more useful: clarity. Here is what most people don't understand about divorce when children and money are involved. The person who panics loses. The person who stays calm, who documents everything, who hires the right lawyer instead of the first lawyer, that person wins, slowly, quietly, and completely. I hired Patricia Nguyen, a divorce attorney with a reputation for being merciless in the most professional way possible. During our first meeting, she asked me one question that changed everything. "Did your husband have access to any of your father's inheritance money?" I told her no. That inheritance from my father, when he passed 4 years earlier, had gone directly into an account under my name only, kept entirely separate from our joint finances. Patricia smiled for the first time in our meeting. "Good," she said. "Then that's protected. Now let's talk about what isn't." What wasn't protected, it turned out, was far more complicated than I expected. Mark had quietly been pulling money from our joint accounts for over a year, Small amounts at first, then larger ones, moved into an account I didn't know existed. When Patricia's forensic accountant traced it, we found nearly $40,000 had gone toward hotel rooms, jewelry, a leased car for Ashley, and a down payment on an engagement ring he bought before our divorce was even finalized. I sat in Patricia's office holding the printed statement, and my hands did shake, but not from sadness. From something sharper. "He was planning this for over a year," I said. "Longer, probably," Patricia said. "People like this don't jump. They build a bridge first, then walk across it while pretending they fell." The judge was not kind to Mark. Financial infidelity, especially when documented this cleanly, tends to sway courts, even in no-fault divorce states, because it demonstrates a pattern of deception that affects equitable distribution. I was awarded the house. I was awarded 60% of the remaining joint assets instead of the standard 50, specifically because of the funds he diverted. He was ordered to pay child support for our 17-year-old, who still lived with me, and I watched him sign the papers with a hand that trembled slightly. The same hand that had once slid a wedding ring onto my finger in a church full of people who cried happy tears for us. He moved in with Ashley for good. I moved on slowly, the way grief actually works instead of the way movies show it. Not a single dramatic breakdown, but 1,000 small Tuesdays where I had to relearn how to be a person by myself. I threw myself into work, I got a promotion, I started taking my daughter to volleyball games alone, and discovered I didn't mind the silence in the car afterward. I started sleeping through the night again, around month 7. By month 10, I had stopped checking his social media entirely, which felt strangely like winning a war I hadn't realized I was still fighting. Then, 11 months after the divorce was finalized, my phone rang, and it was him. "Diane, I need your help." I let the silence stretch just long enough to make him uncomfortable. "Help with what, Mark?" "Can we meet, please? I wouldn't ask if I had anywhere else to go." Against every instinct I had cultivated over the previous year, I agreed to meet him at a coffee shop near my office. Not because I owed him anything, because I wanted badly to see his face when he told me whatever this was. He looked different, thinner. His clothes, once tailored and expensive, hung slightly loose, his hands wrapped around his coffee cup like it was the only warm thing left in his life. "Ashley left me 3 months ago," he said, before I'd even sat down fully. I said nothing. I let him keep talking, the way you let a wound drain before you decide whether it needs stitches. "She was seeing someone else the whole time. Some guy from her yoga studio. A client. I found out because he started showing up to pick her up from the apartment we shared. The apartment I was paying for." "You bought her an engagement ring," I said. It wasn't a question. I already knew. His face flushed. "How did you—" "Patricia's forensic accountant has a very thorough eye for detail," I said. "It came up in discovery, $4,200 if I remember correctly." He looked like he might be sick. "She kept the ring. She sold it, actually. I found the pawn shop receipt in her email." I took a slow sip of my coffee to keep my expression steady. There is a particular kind of satisfaction that doesn't come from anger. It comes from watching gravity do exactly what gravity always does. "That's not why I'm here," I said. "You said you needed help." Mark's jaw tightened, the same way it used to when he was building up to a confession he'd rehearsed. "I lost my job in March. The company restructured, and my position got cut. I've been living off savings, but there weren't many savings left after the divorce, and after Ashley's apartment and the ring, and I'm 3 months behind on rent for a studio apartment. My car got repossessed last week. I have about $1,100 to my name." He looked up at me, and for a moment I saw the man I'd married, the one who used to fix my car before I even noticed something was wrong with it, the one who used to hold my hand during turbulence even though he wasn't scared of flying, just scared for me. Then the moment passed, and I remembered that man had let himself become this one. "I don't know who else to ask," he said. My parents are gone. My brother won't take my calls anymore. I know I have no right to ask you of all people, but I thought maybe you could loan me something. Just enough to get back on my feet. I'd pay you back." I sat with that for a long moment. Outside the window, a woman walked past with a stroller, unbothered by the collapse happening quietly at our table. "Do you remember what you told me?" I said. "The night I found out about Ashley?" He winced. "Diane, please, that was—" "You said I'd let myself go. You said I stopped trying. You said what you had with her was real in a way our marriage wasn't, for years, meaning you'd already decided our marriage was fake long before you told me. Do you remember saying that?" His eyes dropped to the table. "I said a lot of things I regret." "I'm sure you did, but I want you to understand something, Mark, and I want you to really hear it, because I've had a long time to think about exactly how I would say this if this day ever came." I leaned forward slightly. "I am not angry anymore. I want you to know that first, because what I'm about to say isn't coming from rage. It's coming from clarity." He nodded slowly, unsure where this was going. "You didn't lose everything because of bad luck," I said. "You lost everything because you built your entire second life on lies and other people's money, and eventually the people you lied to and stole from stopped paying for it. Ashley didn't leave you because she's a bad person who got what she deserved. She left you because you were never actually building something with her. You were just running from something with me. And running isn't the same as arriving." "That's not fair," he said quietly. "No," I agreed. "None of this has been fair. Not to me, not to our kids, who had to explain to their friends why their dad moved in with a yoga instructor 5 years older than our daughter's babysitter. None of it was fair, but I've made peace with unfair things before. I did it after my father died. I did it after you left. I can do it again." I stood up and reached into my purse, and for one brief second I watched something like hope flicker across his face, as if he thought I was about to hand him a check. Instead, I placed a folded piece of paper on the table. "What's this?" he asked. "A list," I said. 3 shelters in the county that offer temporary housing assistance for men in financial crisis. A number for a nonprofit that helps with job placement for people over 40 who've had a gap in employment. And the name of a financial counselor who helped me rebuild my credit after the divorce, free of charge through a community program. She's very good." He stared at the paper like it was written in a language he didn't recognize. "Diane, I was asking for money, a loan, not a pamphlet." "I know," I said. "And I'm not giving you money, Mark. Not because I can't, because I won't. You spent 16 years teaching me what happens to a woman who keeps giving to someone who takes without ever really seeing her. I finally learned the lesson. I'm not going back to summer school." I picked up my coffee cup and my purse, and I turned to leave, and that's when he said the thing I think he'd been holding on to the whole conversation, the thing that finally cracked his voice for real. "I made a mistake, the biggest mistake of my life. I know that now. Isn't there some part of you that still—" "There was," I said, cutting him off gently, because even now, even after everything, I didn't need to be cruel to be honest. For a long time, actually, I used to lie awake wondering what I did wrong, wondering if I really had let myself go, wondering if there was a version of me that could have kept you from leaving. It took me almost a year of therapy to understand something important, Mark. You didn't leave because of anything I did. You left because of who you decided to become. And I can't loan you money to fix a problem that was never about money in the first place. I walked out of that coffee shop into the parking lot, and I sat in my car for exactly 4 minutes before I let myself cry, not out of sadness, but out of something closer to relief, the kind that comes after you finally set down something heavy you didn't realize you were still carrying. 6 months later, I ran into Mark's brother Daniel at our daughter's college family weekend. Daniel and I had stayed close despite everything. He told me privately, right after the divorce, that he was ashamed of what his brother had done. Over coffee in the student union, he told me Mark had taken the job placement referral after all. He was working now, an entry-level position at a logistics company, making less than half what he used to make, living in a one-bedroom apartment above a hardware store. He asks about you sometimes, Daniel said carefully. He knows he doesn't have the right to, but he asks. I nodded and changed the subject to how our daughter was doing in her marketing courses, because I realized, somewhere between that conversation and the drive home, that I no longer needed to know the answer. Mark's life, wherever it landed, was no longer a chapter I was writing. It was simply a book I had closed. I sold the house 8 months after that meeting in the coffee shop, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I bought a smaller place closer to my daughter's new college and closer to the lake I'd always wanted to live near. I painted the walls colors Mark would have hated, soft sage greens and warm terracotta, because for 16 years our house had been decorated in the neutral beiges he preferred, and I never even noticed I hadn't chosen them myself until they were gone. I still work at the manufacturing company, though I run the whole finance division now instead of just the accounting department. Patricia and I still have lunch twice a year, and she still tells the story of my case to younger associates as an example of what happens when a client stays calm and lets the evidence do the talking instead of the emotions. Sometimes people ask me if I regret not helping him that day in the coffee shop, if I feel guilty watching a man I once loved struggle while I built a good, quiet, stable life just a few miles away. I don't, because I did help him in the only way that mattered. I gave him the truth, folded on a piece of paper, and I let him carry it himself for once, instead of handing him my strength the way I had for 16 years while he spent it on someone else. The last time I saw him was at our daughter's graduation this spring. He sat 3 rows behind me, alone, in a suit that looked a size too big, clapping when her name was called. Afterward, in the crowd of families and balloons and cameras, he caught my eye for just a moment and gave me a small nod, the kind you give someone you respect but no longer know. I nodded back and I meant it. Then I turned around, found my daughter in the crowd, hugged her so tightly she laughed and told me to let go, and walked out into the bright afternoon sun without looking back even once. That, I've learned, is what peace actually feels like. Not fireworks. Not a dramatic confrontation where the villain finally gets what's coming to him in some cinematic collapse. Just a woman walking forward toward the rest of her life, while the man who once told her she'd let herself go finally understood exactly what he had let go of.